Hello, welcome to episode 2 of the Tell Great Stories podcast. My name is Andy Shaw, and this week we are looking at Antony and Cleopatra, which was performed in 2019. Today we have with us...
Hello, I'm Dario Knight. I was the director of the show.
Hello, I'm Rob Aldington. I played Mark Antony.
Hi, and I'm Joanne Rothery, and I played Cleopatra.
Okay, so Dario, this was a huge play to take on. What made you choose Antony and Cleopatra?
Well, a couple of reasons really. One was we'd done Twelfth Night the year before, and we'd always said we wanted to alternate each year between doing a comedy and a drama, so we knew we were looking for one of the tragedies again. I suppose a big reason was it's kind of got a special place in my heart, Antony Cleopatra. It was the first Shakespeare play I ever studied that I got. It was my kind of gateway into Shakespeare. I think everyone has that slightly light bulb moment where they cotton on to Shakespeare, or why he's so brilliant, why the poetry works. And so when I ended up working in theatre and I ended up being a director, I always kind of thought it'd be fun to do, although obviously a bit of a challenge. And the deciding factor, really, the third thing, was back in 2017 when we did Macbeth, which Jo was in as Lady M. I remember we got towards the end of it, and as a director, you kind of hold certain bits of ideal casting in your head that just kind of stay there for a while, and every so often you do end up plucking one of them and going, let's do that. And I always thought, because I had a real love and a connection with Antony Cleopatra, I thought Jo would be brilliant as Cleopatra. And I kind of stored that away and thought one day we'll come around to doing that. And so eventually we did, because we wanted to do something that was a bit ambitious. We'd done Macbeth and Twelfth Night, which were both plays you see performed quite often. They're quite familiar to audiences. Antony and Cleopatra is not something you see very often, particularly at a community level. So it was, all things kind of combined really, and that's what led to doing it.
Brilliant. Okay, and then onto the actors. First of all, to Jo, how did you feel when finding out what Shakespeare play it was going to be, and after being offered the parts?
Well, yeah. Oh, I didn't know that, Dario. That's news to me. That's really nice. Well, that's the thing. Dario said that he was planning to put this on, but the opposite really. I didn't know anything about the play. All I knew was Morecambe and Wise and Elizabeth Taylor, and I was like, wow, that sounds really ambitious. So of course I had a look into it. I read the script, and I thought, gosh, this is a crazy lady. I'm really not sure how I'm going to be able to play her. She was so complex and a real challenge, I think, for an actress to get her head round. So I had a big chat with Dario. We met up for coffee in the days when you could do that, and his enthusiasm for the whole production was so infectious, and it was we had such a great chat that day, and he sort of said, he gave me all the confidence that, in all his belief and just. I could see all the visions in his head and all his plans for it, and it was really exciting. And I just thought, I'd be crazy not to give this a go. So, he invited me to audition. I did those pieces, and then, and then it was like he offered me the part. So I was equally excited and terrified at the same time.
That's a good mixture of emotions, I think, for any play.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and then the same question to Rob as well. Obviously, you were offered a different part initially, and so you ultimately learned 2 different parts, really. So how did you feel about the initial part?
Well, I think you're really complimenting me there, telling me that I learned 2 parts, because you're assuming I got into learning the first part. So yeah, for me it was really weird because. Like Jo, I auditioned and I was hoping to play Mark Antony, and then Dario offered me the part of Enobarbus, and so I accepted that. That was fine, and I was looking forward to the play, and I started to read up. And Enobarbus is actually a really, really nice part. There's a lot of depth in it. There's a lot of light and shade in his part. So I was all set to to go ahead with that. And then I think it was 6 weeks before the curtain was due to go up. Chris, who was due to play Antony, had a change of job and couldn't do the play. So Dario asked me if I would have a go at it, and so it was like Joe, I suppose, a mixture of terror and excitement. Yeah. But it was such a great opportunity to play such a big part, but not much time to learn it. So it was a massive sort of intellectual challenge, really, learning that a part that size, just the sheer size of it, the number of speeches in a short period of time. But looking back, and I suppose I thought, well, if I don't do it, who's going to do it? And will the play be able to go ahead? And I couldn't sort of countenance the play not going ahead because so many people were involved and they were all into learning their stuff, and so there was no way that that I wanted the production to stop. So I thought to myself, well, you better get on with it then. So,
but we were lucky, really, and it was a great position to be in. Although, obviously, having someone who is one of the title characters dropping out is a bit terrifying for any director. How brilliant that we had it in the cast as someone who could come in and do it, and not just do it in order to cover it. Rob did it because he was really suited to it. And I think it's one of the best examples you can have of you end up where you need to be. I think 9 times out of 10 in life, you end up doing what you need to do, and you end up with the cast you were supposed to have. So, I mean, it was frightening for all concerned just because of the time involved, and because we were going on tour, we weren't able to sort of shunt it back any further in the calendar. But it was a bit scary. But full credit to Rob for as you say, having to learn so many lines in such a quick amount of time. But equally, I think it was fantastic that we had someone who could step into it so easily and do it so well. It's not just a case of covering a problem. It's a different take on the character that worked brilliantly, and as I say, you end up where you need to be.
Absolutely, yeah. We were so grateful as a cast. I'm sure I could speak for everyone that Rob stepped up to that, really, and honestly saved the day, because we would have really struggled to find someone prepared to do that in such a short space of time, like you say. But because Rob was already part of the team, we were all, everyone was supportive behind it and all behind him, and just that's the thing with the great thing about working with Unbound is it is an ensemble, and we're all in it together, and we're all we're just all so grateful for each other, really.
Yeah, once something is rolling, you just don't want it. You just don't want to stop it. Really, it's not something that you can put in the can. That's absolutely the last option, isn't it?
Yeah, really
and
is.
It meant we could avoid what Lara and I call Operation Sock Puppet, which is the last resort for all theatre shows. If all else fails, we will just get sock puppets.
I think I would quite enjoy an Antony Cleopatra version in sock puppet form. I think maybe that could be a future project for you, Dario.
If lockdown goes on much longer.
Absolutely, I can see that. Absolutely, via Zoom.
We could all play 2 characters each then.
Yes, far fewer actors, costumes much easier.
Oh, I love it.
But it meant you got a promotion as well, Andy, because you were Thidius, weren't you? Before
I was Thidius originally. Yes.
Rose up through the ranks.
Yeah, I was very pleased as soon as I saw that there was an opening for Enobarbus, which was to be honest, the character which I would have liked initially. As soon as I saw that, I was straight onto an email to you, wasn't I? And I really want this part. Can't remember what I wrote now, but I want it. I don't know if you've got somebody in mind for it. I was ecstatic actually to be offered the part in the end.
And I think all that shuffling around and people doing, having to change and changing together makes for, you get through it by just positive thinking, really, and everybody being in the same boat in terms of, the probably 5 or 6 people who were affected and shuffled along in a chain, really.
And I felt like I sort of built a connection with you as well, Rob, because the two of us were the ones who had moved, and they were now having to learn an entirely new part in 6 weeks' time.
Yeah.
Probably slightly less for me actually, because obviously there was the buffer time between you moving up and then me moving up. I think it was probably maybe half a week or so, and I can't remember now. But yeah, I did feel like we were the two almost not new, but new to a part, and it sort of made it a bit special for us, didn't it, in a way?
Yeah, yeah, it was. It was good.
Yeah. Huge admiration to both of you because, yeah, I don't think I could have done that.
Yeah.
Well, I think, as Dario says, there's a certain fate about it. You want it to happen, things shuffle along, and you end up with whatever's fated to happen in some ways. So,
and the other thing to say about the shuffling around that happened was that when Andy moved up to playing Enobarbus, we then needed someone to play Phidias. And around the same time, or possibly slightly after that, we had another actor depart the production due to scheduling conflicts, and we then needed a new Agrippa. And that's how we ended up working with Casey and with Jade. They both came in a little bit later on and hadn't been part of the original audition process. So again, fate, or whatever you like to call it, led to us working with them, and they were both brilliant, and you kind of can't imagine the production without them now. So yeah, as I say, you end up with the cast that you need.
Brilliant. Okay, I should move on to another question. This one's to Dario. What considerations stroke planning goes into adapting an epic play for an intimate performance space, and how early does the process start?
I mean, picking the play was about probably 18 months to 2 years. We kind of work quite far in advance on these things. There's always a vague idea bubbling in your head. The proper nuts and bolts work was probably just over a year. I think you start in advance. So there is a bit of a crossover with the previous production because we do a Shakespeare play every year. The challenge is, the big one is it's such a massive play. I think unedited it runs about 3.5 hours, maybe 3.75 hours. That's just not practical for a community theatre company because we're not rehearsing Monday to Friday 9 to 5. We're doing one day a week basically rehearsing with people learning lines in between. So it needed to be edited down. And also for an audience, we've always tried with the Unbound Shakespeare shows to attract people who are perhaps a bit wary of Shakespeare or don't go and watch a lot of Shakespeare. And if you're trying to get them involved, they're more likely to watch a play that's closer to 2 hours than 4. I'm aware might be upsetting some Shakespeare purists. They exist to be annoyed about things, so I feel it's my duty to annoy them.
Well, Shakespeare used to cut things himself, didn't he?
Yeah. Exactly. The notion of being a purist is kind of being pig ignorant of how theatre worked, because all the texts that exist are composites of various sources, so there is no one true version of each play, and they were prepared for publication, not performance. So I think it's Romeo and Juliet with the line about 2 hours traffic of our stage. That's because Shakespeare's plays would have been about 2 hours, because he didn't do evening performances for the general public because there was a curfew. You had to shut before it got dark. So it was kind of, he did matinees and you couldn't go on for 3.5 hours. You had to do about 2 hours ish. So all of them would have been cut. There's no way Shakespeare would have done Antony and Cleopatra and Hamlet and King Lear and Troilus and Cressida in the form they're written. They would have been cut down and improvised with and bits glossed over because actors had, God knows how many plays in their heads at one time. The notion of doing it exactly word perfect is bollocks, frankly. So you have to cut them. And again, because of our circumstances, it's got 30 or 40 named parts in it, 30 or 40 speaking parts in it. That's not really practical, so you have to whittle them down. So the biggest consideration is just kind of editing. And the thing is, I've never gone back to the play in its full form since we did it. So I've kind of forgotten about all the stuff we didn't use or didn't put in. But I seem to remember there just being endless Roman soldiers and messengers and attendants, which we amalgamated into 3 or 4. We whittled them down, which I think was a good thing because it meant characters like, in our version, Agrippa, Phidias and Eros had a bit more of a trajectory, and there was something more to get your teeth into as an actor, because they had a bit more of an emotional through line rather than just popping up every so often, handing a message to Antony or Octavius and disappearing again. And that got it down to about 18, I think, we had in the cast, which was a lot more manageable for us. So it's the script is the biggest thing, and the number of characters. There's other things, scenery, the setting. It bounces back and forth between Egypt and Rome with nearly every scene, and occasionally to Athens. That's obviously quite tricky, but again, I suppose going back to Shakespearean practice, Shakespeare didn't have a lot of scenery. Theatre at that time was done with whatever you had to hand. So if you take the Globe as an example, they had the Globe, which is obviously a beautiful space as it is. But there wouldn't be a lot of scenery brought in for each different scene or different location in the play, and they wouldn't have had elaborate costume. Shakespeare would have performed largely in modern dress, or so, modern dress at that time, with only sort of token bits of togas or something to suggest different characters or different time zones. So we kind of took that approach, really, which was suggest things rather than state them. There's no point trying to build a huge bit of scenery to be a Roman Senate and then take that down and put up a big Egyptian palace and then take that down and put the Roman one back up again. That's just not going to happen. And theatre is about suggestion rather than statement. So we designed the set to be one space that could work for everything, but with little bits of Egyptian iconography and bits of Roman iconography. I remember there being John and Angela painted a map of the ancient world on the back wall of the theatre at the Limelight. So it was about creating a space in which everything could work, and then you can use lighting to suggest different locations. Matt Black's music was key because which is kind of weaved through the show, and he would have, I think it was the wind instruments for the Egyptian scenes, the drums for the Roman scenes, and that just led you into each scene back and forth, which was a great way of suggesting rather than stating where you were. So yeah, with a bit of creativity, it was certainly a challenge, but actually when you get going, it's perfectly possible to put on a play of that scale in an intimate venue. You just have to be a bit more clever.
Yeah, and I think with people like, so gifted that with people like John and Angela and Matt around,
yes,
to help out. And so you're starting with a blank canvas, but you've got some really great, great painters to paint your picture, haven't you? With all the different
Elaine
media.
with the costumes as well.
Yeah,
there's the pink t-shirts.
Fantastic job. Yes, which would the Romans wore t-shirts with sort of sashes, and again, it was just sort of suggesting the colours you associate with Roman soldiers, which is red and brown and maybe a bit of silver or bronze. But the t-shirts were all white, and they got put through the washing machine, and when they came out, they were bright pink. And combined with the quite tight trousers, sort of Gareth, Andy, Casey, and Jade and Alistair did look a bit like a 1980s improv movie, I have to say. Sort of improv magic dance kind of a vibe going on. But we went away and re-dyed them, and it came out, it was fine in the end. But they were a bit they're a bit loud initially.
Yeah.
But no, they look great in the end. And so, as you say, people like John and Angela are just, we've said this before, but they're amazing, and it's one of my favourite bits of set painting was there.
Yeah, their talents are amazing and literally unbound.
There's a real sense of less is more as well, isn't there? Just special little things that they do. As you say, the backdrop of the world or whatever, the suggestions of the sounds from Matt. It's just there's a balance to be struck. And there's a director who's a friend of mine used to say, the audience like to use their imagination.
Yeah, and I mean, if there's anyone in the audience who's sort of pointing out that's not a historically accurate costume or that's not a historically accurate painting, you're in the wrong genre. Go and film and TV is where you want all that sort of stuff. But theatre has always been, and I say going back to Shakespeare's day, it's about just suggesting something. Hence where you get things like Oh, for a Muse of Fire. They make no apologies about the fact that you haven't got the Battle of Agincourt in front of you. You've got a representation of it. But it's fine. You're there to imagine it, and if everyone's on board and everyone's wants it, willing it on, you have a great time. It doesn't matter that it's not either historically accurate.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's art at its best, isn't it? When you're creating an atmosphere and suggesting something and letting the audience suspend their disbelief and then just go along with it. It's like, especially in Queen's Park Centre, the Limelight Theatre, it's the perfect space for that because it's intimate and. You've got the lighting, it's like, and all the tech that Stefan's does a great job. And like you say, the music, Matt's music was, it just created that wonderful feeling of the change of each scene. It was great.
Yeah, it gave each scene its identity, didn't it?
I think for those of us who are on stage, all of this, it's a kind of magic. Like Stefan bringing all that stuff together, it all seems to just to roll along, and it's quite, it's great, it's amazing because it is complex.
I feel like as an actor in that situation, seeing all the different elements come together, the background being painted one week, and then we get learning tunes another week, and just the whole flavour of everything coming together really actually helps with the performance, just the fine tuning our performance in those sort of weeks as it all comes together. And I think if we did it completely minimalist, then I think we would probably be acting in quite a different way.
As like you said, Andy, about seeing it come together as you go through the rehearsal process. The Shakespeare plays are always a bit of a challenge to begin with, because we start in January typically rehearsing, which is right at the tail end of Panto. So you do end up rehearsing on the Panto set of what's left of it after Christmas.
Yeah.
They're doing the High Egyptian Court in Toyland or wherever it was that they'd.
Yeah.
Oh no, it was King Arthur's Castle, I think.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because I was just King of Camelot 1 minute, and then next thing I'm just like lowly soldier Theseus walking onto what was my kingdom. kind of a big step down. Yeah. Okay, on to another question then, I think. To Rob and Joe, we'll ask Rob first. How did you initially prepare for these roles? How did you find the rehearsal process? And was there something about your character you discovered as you worked through the play that surprised you?
Well, I think in my case, the fact that I didn't have much time to learn Antony sort of made my sort of organised way of doing things even more critical than usual, really. So I always start by going through the script and breaking the script down into chunks, and trying to put a meaning behind each chunk, and that involves a lot of googling of text to understand exactly what the character is saying.
Spark notes.
So I spend a lot of time googling stuff, and then literally kind of allocating myself real time by which I've got to have the book down for each of those sections, because otherwise there's just too much. So it's breaking it down into manageable chunks is what I normally do. But then I think here, in this particular case, we did quite a lot of one-to-one rehearsal, Joe and I, because we had to establish that relationship between the two characters. And there is such intimacy between the two between Antony and Cleopatra, the two of them, that we spent a fair bit of time going through particular sections of the script where that needed to come across, and that was really, really important to make the relationship between the two of them credible for the audience. And things about Mark Antony, discoveries. Well, I suppose. I did, like Joe, I didn't know the story beforehand, and just what an incredible, multifaceted character Mark Antony is. You might think that the guy is just a soldier, but in fact, Shakespeare takes you into the depth of his character and the complications of his life, and how he's got all these different stakeholders that he's trying to satisfy. In fact, so the sheer depth of the characters and breadth is amazing, really.
Brilliant. Okay, and same question to Joe.
Well, I didn't really know the part so well, but I was really grateful for Dario's edit, actually, because when I'd read the play originally, Cleopatra, she goes on a little bit at the end. She goes on and on and on. I was saying, oh God, I'll never be able to learn this. But Dario's script was brilliant, because his edit was it got all the essence in a manageable way. So I was so relieved about that. I did go and see it, actually. It was on at the National Theatre. Just I think it was January I went to see it, just before we started rehearsals. So that was really helpful. I think it was one with Ray Fiennes and Sophie Okonedo. Did you see that one, Dario?
Yeah, I'd seen it. I'd seen it the year before. I think it opened in October or something like that. So I saw it in the autumn before we did the casting, I think. So, like you say, it's good to get a little reminder of the play before we go.
Yeah, because obviously the essence is the same, and it's like you just can take from that, it just inspires you really. And again, a jumping off point, I watched as many different versions as I could. I researched Cleopatra as a historical figure, also as like I said, the Liz Taylor version, although that sort of told you more about the 60s than it did about ancient Egypt. And I actually found a version on the BBC that the BBC done in 1974, and that seemed to be the closest Cleopatra that I'd interpreted myself as how I would play it, and that was kind of nice for me because I found it was Janet Sussman, her version of Cleopatra sort of matched the way I envisioned myself playing it, so I could watch of her doing it and get inspiration that way. And I think you do. It's really nice to take all those different versions, but then you make it your own, and it sort of gives you sort of a big broad range of things to take ideas from really. And so that's always fun for me to do, and learning the lines is key. And then in the rehearsal process, that's my favorite thing when we are working on a production is the rehearsal process, because things come up when you're working with other actors that totally surprise you, because you rehearse at home and you learn your lines, but then when you actually say those lines into someone's eyes, they don't always react the way you might have expected or imagined, and then that throws a whole other dimension. And of course, with Dario directing, he can see these sort of things happening. And this is when, everything comes alive, because you've got people bouncing off one another, and the way that everything interacts suggests other things. So, a lot of comedy came out of it that I wasn't really aware of the first time around. So perhaps that answers that question about Cleopatra. Like, what most surprised me is finding that comedy in there, and also her likability, because at first I thought, God, she's not only insane, she's fickle, she's like, all over the place. But actually finding that I actually, an affection for her, and her position as a woman of trying to establish and maintain her power in a man's world, and how she does that, and how she tries to on the surface she's portraying all this, she's so melodramatic and over the top all the time, but underneath she's a woman, and she's madly in love, and it's like finding that it's just fascinating, the whole process, and yeah, that's one of the best bits about putting a production on is finding that really inside information about the character.
All those things about being human that Shakespeare holds up the mirror to us all, doesn't he? And even 400 years later, the same themes you see relevant in these plays and these parts.
You're
that
so
you
right.
can see today, in your own life and other people's lives around you. That's what's extraordinary about Shakespeare to me.
You mentioned the Janet Sussman version from the 70s. Was that the one with Patrick Stewart playing Enobarbus?
He did make he did, yeah.
Because I watched that several times as well. That was one of my main go-to. How do I interpret this scene sort of thing? Resource, I suppose you could call it. Yeah, so I quite often went to that one during those mad 5 or 6 weeks before the plays started.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear you both talk about watching other versions, because it's something that I kind of deliberately don't do. I like to take the text and dig through it and work out what it means. It's weird. There's sort of part of me that doesn't want to. I don't want to be an imitator of someone else's performance.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of fear that I have that stops me. So I don't tend to watch other versions of a play that I'm doing.
Yeah.
I like to try and just do it raw and work out for myself. So it's really interesting that both of you actually, do it the other way.
Yeah.
Joe, you sound like you sort of absorb as many different versions as you can, which is...
Yeah, like you say, but I think it's a case of time, because I absolutely get where you're coming from, Rob, because you had a limited amount of time, and that time was best spent with the script, because that's the starting point. Obviously, I think what I do is the same as you. I start with the script, and you get your head around it. Like you say, Googling it, like looking at all the Spark notes for GCSE.
Yeah.
I did all of that. I'd already sort of you've already got to that point, and you've done all that, and you've found how you'd like to perform it. And it's these other research things are a luxury, really, that if you've got the time, you can just indulge yourself of like, this is interesting. So it's a purely if there's time to do that. And I think it's a lovely thing, because it can just give you sort of little suggestions here and there, and then you have to sort of forget it all and just make it your own again.
Yeah, maybe as it is a time thing as well. I think as well, that I was working as well, so I was only learning in the evenings and at the weekends. So
I'll tell the story of learning your lines in the hotel room.
Oh yeah.
Well, I was because I was working away from home. I was doing a weekly commute, so I was staying in the travel lodge, and it must have been really weird for whoever was in the rooms next door to hear me ranting away.
Foul Egyptian.
Foul Egyptian.
Yeah, ranting away at these really weird speeches. But in some ways, actually learning that being away in a hotel room on your own is actually quite good, because you can really focus. There's no disturbance at all. You can just
I remember you coming into rehearsals one Sunday and saying, "I'm worried that the people next door think I've got a thing against Egyptians."
Yeah. Yeah, this foul Egyptian hath betrayed me. It's not the kind of thing you expect to hear through a hotel wall, really, is it?
No.
Don't expect to hear anything. I'd rather hear nothing from other people's rooms. But
right, so this production went on tour, Dario. What venues did you perform at, and how did you adapt to the different spaces?
We started at the Limelight Theatre at Queen's Park, which is our home, and we went to the King's Head pub, St Mary's Church, and the Bucks County Museum. So it was all in Aylesbury that we were touring, and we were very fortunate that we got a grant from Aylesbury Town Council to help with the pay for the touring element and to make that work. So I mean, the adaptation of it is we'd learnt from doing 12th Night the year before at Bucks County Museum. We'd performed that there, and we were in the garden. We had to work with only having one entrance and exit, and that's actually quite a good thing to bear in mind and a practice to get used to, because actually in all the venues, I think all three that we went to, it was largely the same. There's one way on and off the stage. I suppose it's about the audience's suspension of disbelief. So with the Limelight, you've got multiple exits and entrances, so you can make them quite quick. When you've only got one, you've got to just create a language of movement, really. So when we were at the museum, there was a line of trees that are behind the performance space, and we would simply make it so that if you were exiting a scene, you went off stage left and walked around behind the trees, and at the same time whoever was coming on for the next scene would come on stage right directly onto the stage. So it didn't matter that you were technically on stage at the same time and visible. If you make that part of the process, then the audience goes along with it, and the suspension of disbelief is untouched. And actually that adapted pretty well to everywhere we went, with both the church and the King's Head. And it was another place where Matt's music came in handy, because it did help the changeover as well as signifying the change in location, because we didn't take any of the scenery with us apart from a few podiums, I think, and a few stools that we used during the drinking scenes. It wasn't too much of a challenge. Again, if you've got a good team, if you've got Stefan who is on it and can work in any space you give him. So in the King's Head, he was hiding under a staircase with his little soundboard, or in the museum garden, he was hidden around sort of behind a wall. And the cast were brilliant at adapting to it and rolling with it. But I'm a great believer. You work with the space that you've got. There's no point trying to force the show that you've made onto a space. You let it naturally adapt and see where it goes. But it was great fun, and hopefully we'll once we're all allowed out again, we'll all be back there again.
Yeah, hopefully in the warmer weather for the outdoor ones.
Yes, we have. Shakespeare tours are being moved to the summer now because we got slightly
it was quite
slightly tired of performing them in the freezing cold.
Yeah, it was quite a chilly April, I remember that one being, and particularly for those of us who had to die on stage and then not shiver as a corpse was a bit of a challenge.
Oh my gosh, that's one of my biggest memories, actually, lying on the cobbles and thinking, do corpses normally shiver this much? Like, hopefully the audience aren't being too critical at this point.
I remember when we first did that sort of outdoor, or I was first doing that sort of outdoor adaptation, we did 12th Night. And I remember how I found it very challenging at first to have the entrance and exits, the opposite way round. That things were handed a different way from how they'd been in the indoor space, and that my memory, I think, works partly on which way I'm moving and in which direction. So that was quite a challenge, but actually it's very enjoyable. I got used to it, and it's overridden by the kind of joy of taking the theatre to places and people who haven't, bought a ticket to go in. I mean, to go and do it in the pub in the pub garden there, where people are just enjoying having a drink and a bite to eat, or in the museum where they might have just gone along to, and then they realise, there's a production going on. That's a really special thing to be able to do.
I think we were fairly lucky with the weather in general, but do I remember it hailing a little bit in the King's Head?
Yeah, the King's Head. And about 20 minutes before we went on.
Never was there a more appropriate line. Hail, Caesar.
Yes, standing there with Dan looking at it. I think, was it you that said that, Rob?
Yeah, I was desperate for it to
chimed
hail.
up from behind.
I couldn't wait when the hail came down.
Brilliant.
I had to, it was a gift. It's a gimme.
No, that was good fun.
Yeah.
And it's got such a history, that place, as well. It's just fantastic to perform in somewhere that was around when the play would have originally been performed.
Absolutely. Yeah. That courtyard is just a fantastic little venue, really. And you've only got the one entrance and exit at the back. But, it's a little bit like as you say, Dario, the way it would have been originally.
Yeah.
You've had the actors resting at the back, coming in and out, one place.
I remember being in the St Mary's Church, and there's a balcony at the back of the over the back of the stage that we were performing on, and there was a scene that took place up there where it was a sort of bit of liberty taking with history, but we had Octavius murder Pompey. Octavius was played by Dan and Pompey was played by Alistair, and Alistair did his death scene, but then sort of collapsed to the floor. But the thing is, the front of the balcony is cladded, so no one could see him, and you could sort of tell that he'd kind of gone, oh, hang on, no one can see me. So he kind of managed to crawl along the balcony so that his head appeared at the top of the stairs, so that he could finish off the scene. So that was commitment.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
Love it.
But again, if you've got the right bunch of people around, you can adapt to pretty much anything. Yeah. And that's a good example of, with Alistair. It was very funny, but he was great at sort of making sure they saw, because otherwise it was a bit suspect that he just disappeared and then it wasn't seen again.
I seem to remember somebody got stuck up there as well, didn't they? They couldn't come down the steps for fear of making noise, so they ended up there till I don't know if it was the end of the show or the end of the scene.
Wasn't it? She went off through one of the doors, and then luckily it wasn't too far near the end of the first half. But there wasn't a way out of that room unless you came back onto the stage, so she just stayed up there for the rest of the first half.
Oh dear.
She's stuck there. Cool. I think we've kind of run into the next question I had, actually, which was what was your favourite venue to perform at? So I'll ask it anyway, and then I'm sure there'll be other anecdotes. So to Joe, first of all, what was your favourite venue to perform at, and what were the most memorable moments of the run?
Right. Well, I think, to be fair, my favourite venue is the Limelight Theatre at the Queen's Park, because it's so intimate and closed space, and you really can be in the moment and and believe where you are without any distractions. Having said that, though, everything we've said about, the other places are fun to play. And it's kind of like, when you see the audience as well, which you don't tend to do when you're in the limelight, because the lights are on you and the audience are dark. But sometimes it is fun, especially when we've done a few run-throughs at the Queen's Park. You know what you're doing, so you can kind of look a bit more at the audience reaction. And that actually, one of the most memorable moments for me was at the Bucks County Museum. And, we'd finished the play, and we were just taking our bows, and I looked up, and there was, everyone was applauding, but there was this lady sitting at the front, and she was clapping, but she was in floods of tears. And I remember thinking, oh, wow, we obviously got that right. We did something right. This lady's been, really affected by our production. And I remember thinking that I'm sort of we were really, really proud of that. And
But someone approached her with a collection bucket or something, do you think?
She had hay fever. Maybe. Probably out in the open air, maybe, probably. But that was a really memorable moment. Lying on the cobbles and trying not to shiver was another one.
Yeah. Okay. And then, how about you, Rob? What's your favourite venue and most memorable moments?
Well, I think more of the same really on the venue. I mean, for me, Queen's Park is a great venue, and I think I just love the intimacy of it, and the fact that you can, reality can be truly suspended when the lights go down, and in this play you get the full benefit of light and shade in the performance. So you have your battles going on at one time, and then at another moment. I mean, the times that stick in my mind most, for some strange reason, are very selfishly the ones where I'm largely on my own as Antony, and the lights are down, and I remember a couple of moments really, particularly, and it's strange. As I say, it's strange which ones you remember. But when was it Philippa was the soothsayer and came on, and I was asking her, who's going to win, me or Caesar. And she doesn't give me the answer I want to hear. So I tell her to clear off. And then later on, when I think that Cleopatra's dead, and I say that I'm going to, I'll be with you. I'll be with you soon. I come, my queen, and I just Mark Antony on the stage. And I think I like that. Just I don't know what it is, but just being completely alone. And this person is completely self-absorbed and broken.
I always remember points of any production where things have gone slightly wrong, and you've had to sort of. I remember at some point there was in the background during the party, and we're initially, I think the direction was just rhubarbing in the background, make it feel like an atmosphere. Then after a while, bits of food start getting thrown back and forth the stage, and to a point where it gets to a full-on food fight, from what I remember. And I think at some point, I remember somebody spilling their drink either over themselves. Was it Jade spilled over herself or over somebody else? And one of these.
Jade threw hers at Gareth.
That was it, yeah.
And in the spirit of the scene, she was sort of getting a bit rowdy and just threw it at him.
So Gareth's covered in this, I think it was like Ribena or something. So this not quite pink T-shirt now with a massive purple stain on the front of it. I just remember thinking, okay, we need to rein in this food fight now, because that's just getting a little bit out of hand. So to everybody then, which scenes were the most fun to perform, or in Dario's case to direct, and which were the most difficult? So we'll ask Dario first on that one.
I think actually going back to what Joe was saying earlier about finding out how funny Cleopatra can be, it's always nice when you're doing a tragedy. It's always nice to find the bits that are funny, because a drama with no jokes is just boring, and likewise a comedy with no pathos is kind of inane. So it's really fun to find those moments, and sometimes they're almost a little bit inappropriate, but Shakespeare's really good at that, at finding inappropriate moments to make it funny. So some of the jokey stuff was great to work on, particularly the scene with the messenger, which is quite darkly comic because it's pretty brutal the way Cleopatra attacks him. It's more to do with the scene later where he comes back and has to be kind of coaxed back onto stage to come and speak. And John played the messenger, is so funny at playing this rather jittery messenger. And I remember putting in a joke again. Shakespeare buffs will be appalled because we changed the dialogue, where he's asked to report on Octavia's looks because Antony has been married to her and Cleopatra wants to know what she looks like.
This was one of my favourite scenes, I have to say.
And, we put in an extra line where he says, I think he says, what years is she? And he says, I do think she's 30. And we put it in so that Joe kind of snaps to look at him and he just goes, 9?
I remember that now. Yeah.
So I liked doing those. And I mean, the thing I've always said with Antony Cleopatra is the last scene, the last sequence, as you get towards Cleopatra's suicide, I honestly think that stands up as one of the best things we've ever done. I think it was so moving, and hence why you had a lady crying at the museum. We had a lot of people really affected by that scene, and it was fantastic from everyone, from Joe especially doing Cleopatra's big final speeches, but Katie and Jenny as well as Charmian and Iris. Just amazing, the reactions. There's not a lot of dialogue there for them to do, but their reaction to what's going on was so intense. And my favourite backstage bit is one with Rob. It's at the start of the second half when Octavius, who's played by Dan, finds out that Antony's gone back on the deal and has gone back to Cleopatra. He has a scene right near the start of the second half where he storms onto stage recounting a letter he's been sent. And it was a brilliant way to start the second half because it really shook people out of their sort of post-interval relaxation, because Dan really went for it. And anyone who's seen Dan knows he's amazing at high-intensity scenes. He gave it such welly. And I remember before one performance at Queen's Park, Rob was stood behind him pretending to wind him up like a clockwork soldier, and he didn't know, and he just kind of stood there winding the key and then just pulling it out before he went on, and off he went. and Rob just turned around and went, Duracell Bunny's having a good one. Poor Dan, because he was brilliant. Dan, he was the first thing he did for Unbound, and he was just fantastic.
He's such a lot of energy. Just a huge
amazing
amount
at Octavius,
so believable.
especially,
it was perfect.
Not just the kind of the more kind of angry stuff. There was a scene again towards the end where he goes and sees Cleopatra, and it's a really creepy, tense bit. And the two of you were fantastic in that. But I always remember every time subsequently that Dan did that scene, no matter whether I was watching it or I was backstage, I just sort of pictured Rob winding him up, and calling him the Duracell Bunny.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
For me, the I think that the scenes that were the most fun were definitely the ones with John North as the messenger. He was perfect. He'd be quivering and quaking in his boots, and Cleopatra's just screaming at him. But that scene where Katie and Jenny are behind me, like mouthing to him, like telling him, and he's like looking at them and then at me, and it was
trying to feed him the right answers.
It was just, and I just like look over my shoulder like, what's going on here? And then their two innocent faces are just like, oh, nothing, we're not doing anything. Nothing to see. That was really, really good.
And how about you, Rob? What are your scenes most fun to perform and most difficult?
Yeah, I suppose the ones I like the most for dramatic reasons, really. I love the scene where Mark Antony is telling Cleopatra that he's got to leave, and she's pretending to be sick and telling me that she's tell him to go, stand back or whatever she says, and then they have this sort of cat and mouse around the stage, and I really love that, where as an actor you use distance on the stage like a lever. So if there's a a gap between two characters or a difference between them, you can magnify that by being opposite them and using the more distance you've got. It's like a lever. The bigger the kind of tension and disparity between the two of you. And the most difficult was definitely having to die and make my way like a slug up stage.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
They've got this giant slug making its way up stage to die at the right point, and simultaneously, having to die and decide to climb onto a block at the back of the stage. And that
honestly,
was,
Rob,
that was
that was very
really
memorable. Yeah, because Cleopatra's like reaching out to him. She's like, "Come on," and he's like, "Okay, but I'm just dying." She's like, "Come here. I'm not coming to you. Come here."
So that was really, really difficult.
Mind you, it works for the scene, doesn't it? Because he's not allowed to be dignified. That's the sort of great tragedy at the end, is that even when he's finally makes up his mind about something, he can't die with dignity. It's a sort of tragic thing that Shakespeare gives him, but it works for the scene.
Yeah.
The most difficult scene for me actually was similarly the death scene at the end, and I was so worried. I think, Dario, we did have several conversations about this with the whole, the asp and the, how are we going to do this? Make it sad and not at all, obviously not at all comic. But I have to say, going back to what Dario said earlier, I think all credit has to go to Katie and Jenny. I mean, it was Team Egypt. All of those scenes, I relied on them heavily as Charmian and Iris. And it was a joy to work with my daughter. It was such a lovely opportunity for me that, it's like a once in a lifetime thing to share the stage with your daughter. But there was one point where it was in that scene actually, and we'd done a lot of rehearsals, but we'd never, as it gets closer to the actual performance, you get more into it. It's more intense. And I remember turning back to look, and Cleopatra's all bravado and she's all show and she's quaking inside, but at this point she's putting on a really brave face and she's wanting to make the dramatic suicide and everything. And that would be, that's okay. But if without Katie and Jenny reacting and showing the true pathos behind that bravado, that is the combination that makes the whole thing work. And I remember turning round to just glance at Iris, and there's my daughter with tears streaming down her face. And I almost, the shock of that was like, I almost like forgot my lines, because if you see your own daughter in tears, like, you just want to go, oh, what's the matter?
Yeah.
And it's like, but obviously it's like, oh, it was the whole combination that made that scene work in the end, and that bolstered, my performance, and it became more believable, and I have to give them, the credit for that, really.
Okay. So the last couple of questions, really. So this is to everyone. What is your favourite Shakespeare play? Let's ask Dario that one first.
I honestly, I don't really have one. It is really hard because there's no play that does him as a writer justice. He's so diverse as a writer that he can do kind of really stupid comedies, really kind of knockabout slapstick comedies, and he can write incredibly moving tragedies, and then plays like Much Ado About Nothing that are halfway between the two. So there isn't one. There's scenes that I love and characters that I love, but I going back to the beginning of the podcast, this one's always going to have mean a lot to me, because it was the one that really turned me on to Shakespeare as a writer and made me realize how brilliant he was. So I suppose this one, but yeah, it's impossible to pick just one.
Yeah. And how about Rob? So what's your favourite Shakespeare play? And is there a character you've not yet played that you'd like to take on?
Well, rather boringly, I have to go for the same answer as Dario, really. I think it's really hard to choose one play that stands out above all others. But I think Antony and Cleopatra, it kind of takes some beating, because it's got such wonderful emotional range in there. Character I've not played yet. Well, yeah, again, no, I don't really have. I always want as big a part as the director's prepared to give me. But you're a piece in the jigsaw, so you might, and it depends what the other pieces are. If the other pieces are young lovers, then maybe I'm not going to be your first choice. But there'll be a part in there somewhere for me. So I don't really have a strong ambition in that sense, and also because I'm not a great reader of plays. So there are many Shakespeare plays that I've never read and I don't know what they're about. So it's just great to be part of a team, really, and take the biggest part that the director will let me have.
Yeah.
and make the most of it, because you've got to trust in whoever's doing the casting that they're making a good picture. They're making a good jigsaw with the pieces that they've got, with the actors that they've got. I think.
Yeah, I like the jigsaw analogy. Actually, that's really good. And then well done to Dario for turning a 1,000-piece jigsaw into a 500-piece jigsaw.
Well, I think as well, the thing is sometimes you see a play and you find that the best acting, if you like, or the characters that you identify with most are not necessarily the lead character. There might be somebody with a relatively smaller part, but the picture is such that that's the one that your eye is drawn to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so everyone takes their own part from the play that they identify with. I suppose it's like me with Enobarbus, because when I auditioned, Dario lent me a DVD and I watched it, and it wasn't Antony that was calling to me as a part to potentially play. It was Enobarbus. And maybe a couple of the other ones, but really it was Enobarbus that shouted out to me to be, I kind of like his story as a part of this bigger jigsaw. Finally, the same question to Joe. Your favourite Shakespeare play, and is there a character you've not yet played that you would like to play?
Oh, yeah, again, it's impossible, isn't it, to choose out of all the Shakespeare plays. But maybe it is down to what you first saw, because I was a huge fan of Hamlet. I saw a production at the Royal Exchange in Manchester. It had Robert Lindsay in it, and it was done in the round. It had no costumes, no props or set, and the actors all sat on the seats in the audience and just took their turn. And I've never seen anything like it. I mean, I thought it was the most incredible thing. And I actually went to see that 3 times. I loved it so much. So I've got a soft spot for that, and of course Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. The spin-off with the Tom Stoppard play. I love that. But also Macbeth, I really got a soft spot for that as well. It's got everything. I love all the horror and the drama and the love in that. So that's a good one. As far as what character I'd like to play, I've been really, really so lucky to have played the parts I already have. I've enjoyed them hugely. I think the only one I got Titania, which we did online. Now I really would love to take her on the stage, actually, because that's one thing. I mean, it was hugely fun to do via Zoom, but it's not quite the same when you're sitting on your sofa. So I think if I had the chance to play her again one day, flouncing around in Fairyland, I think that might be quite fun. So
yeah. I'd very much like to be Oberon as well at the same time. So maybe it will happen. Maybe. Do hope so.
Absolutely. Yeah, it'd be
the
lovely.
reunion.
So yeah, thanks to Dario for all the opportunities. Yeah, we've been incredibly lucky.